Hello there. Welcome to episode 4 of Politics. Today we'll be doing a impeachment special. Today's going to be all about the impeachment inquiry into U.S. President Donald Trump. We'll be going over the entire timeline as reported on November 10th, 2019. And so starting us off today will be Alex. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm back. And so what really kicked off the impeachment inquiry was the 12th of August whistleblower report that was handed in to the Inspector General of the United States relating to a call between the President of the United States and President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, on the 25th of July. Through the whistleblower report that was released on the, I believe it was on the 25th of September, and on the 26th, the actual transcript of the call, the Democratic Party and people in Congress found it quite alarming, and a lot of people in the United States have also found it quite alarming, the things that have been going on, and specifically relating to Trump's want for the Ukrainian government to investigate his potential presidential rival in 2020, Joe Biden, and how he, from Trump's point of view, how he helped his son maintain his place on the board of a Ukrainian gas company called Burisma. And so that's where it all started off. And so since then we've had many different witnesses come forth to Congress and to talk about what they know and how they were involved with this. And so here we are. The impeachment inquiry is in full blast, and when we don't know, we'll see where it leads us, and there are a lot of things to take into consideration. So I want to start us off with the call on the 25th of July. So this was a call between President Trump and President Zelensky, where Trump asked for a favor, though.
Some might even call it a quid pro quo.
Yeah, a quid pro quo. We'll go into what that specifically means, but what Trump asked is for a open investigation into Joe Biden and the way that he pushed the Ukrainian government under, I believe it was still under President Poroshenko, to remove the equivalent of the United States Attorney General, Viktor Shokin, who was corrupt, and who was seen as corrupt by a large portion of the world, and a large portion of Europe, and a lot of the allies of the United States. And so some of the aid was being held back by the United States in order to push Ukraine to remove him. Eventually he was removed, but President Trump and his allies claimed that this move was done to stop the investigation into his son's into Hunter Biden's activities there in Ukraine. And so what we've learned from this call is that there's two sides. It's split on partisan lines, and we see that from the Democratic side, people say that it's a horrific show of corruption, Trump trying to push for other countries to try and affect the 2020 elections and push them towards in favor of Trump and away from the Democratic Party, whilst the Republicans are saying that this is totally normal. This is politics as usual. This is how foreign relations work. How international relations and foreign policy works.
Right.
How you just need to make sure that you get something in return for giving away aid. And if, for example, the United States has been very much fighting for freedom and democracy and anti-corruption, so they're kind of using that as an argument against it. So, but I want to bring this to you. In the whistleblower report and in the call that came up, then the transcript that we came up afterwards. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I read the transcript of the call that was released by the White House, and the first thing I remember reading is the parallels to what Joe Biden actually did as vice president to get Viktor Shokin to resign as Ukraine's prosecutor general. In he made a speech at a 2018 event at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. He threatened to withhold $1 billion in aid unless $1 billion in aid to Ukraine unless the prosecutor was fired. And he said, quote, "I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money." So as soon as the Obama administration threatened Ukraine with this action to not get their foreign aid if they did not fire the Attorney General of Ukraine, the Ukrainians caved, which is, very similar to what I think President Trump did when he asked Ukraine to investigate the Bidens in exchange for the aid. The only differences I could see is that the Obama administration was not asking for dirt on a political opponent. They were going after corruption, which, as Alex, you were saying earlier, the United States prides itself on trying to be corruption-free and trying to be the mantra of corruption fighting throughout the world. But I read the transcript of the call, and I didn't, honestly, I'll be honest, find it impeachable. I didn't think that necessarily warranted impeachment because it doesn't violate any federal law that I'm aware of. Unethical, yes. It's extremely unethical, in my opinion, to use the power of the president to try to get dirt on a political opponent. However, I didn't see it violating federal law, which is where I believe the Democrats are going into uncharted territory, trying to use that, high crimes and misdemeanors clause of the Constitution, of the Article 1 of the Constitution, to try to, manipulate this. Because honestly, we have no precedent for this, of the president doing it. We have precedent of the vice president, but not the president. So my initial thought was just, I compared it to Vice President Biden's actions. And then I also said, is it really impeachable? Is it unethical? Yeah, I think it is, but is it really impeachable?
Yeah, no, the thing is that the difference between what Joe Biden was doing and what President Trump was doing is that President Joe Biden had the backing of many of the United States allies in Europe, had the backing of the United States in both houses, both Congress and the Senate, that supported him and would be willing to stop giving aid. And it was the whole government that agreed with at the time President Joe Biden and President Obama on what to do. But then you also have that what they were doing. So this was entirely foreign policy based activity. You didn't have foreign policy interfering with domestic policy,
right?
And you see that divide change very drastically, because you see how you're trying to get a political opponent trying to denigrate a political opponent in the public eye, and that could be seen as corruption. It is seen by the Democrats as entirely as corruption because of the way that the president uses his own office and his own powers to try to influence the elections in the next in 2020, and there is there's many different points of view where you can go about this from a legal point of view, but there's also the campaign finance law.
Right.
So, okay, I just want to put that out there that we're not legal experts, but
Absolutely not.
absolutely not. You never know, in a few years' time we might be, but at this point we're not.
Right.
So some Democrats have been making the point that it does break campaign finance laws, because in campaign finance laws you're not allowed to receive anything of value from a foreign entity, foreign government, or foreign person to help in your campaigns. This was very evident. There was a famous case where there was a Canadian citizen who donated, I think it was somewhere in the region of 100 or 300 US dollars to a campaign, and this was like they prosecuted him. They prosecuted the campaign. So this could come from that angle, and the thing is that the Democrats now have two options. They either zone in on the Ukraine, on the Ukraine phone call and everything that's been happening there, and then they could, or conversely, they could focus on other things that Trump has done to, for example, enrich himself and members of his family, or other, you could say, corrupt dealings that he has done as during his presidency. And where the whistleblower came from is kind of how Trump has been slowly like dismembering the State Department. This started with Rex Tillerson, where there's massive spending cuts on the State Department, and there was a decrease in staff, and there was like a loss of trust in the department, and Trump was turning a lot more to the military, as we've seen with for example, where you've seen in Syria, and he's leaning more towards an aggressive stance.
Even in Ukraine, he withdrew the ambassador to Ukraine and instead appointed a special envoy. Effectively reducing the embassy staff and reducing a large amount of monetary donations. And it's been very obvious in the Trump presidency that we've been going for, shoot first, ask questions later kind of diplomacy, which is not unprecedented. Presidents are in the past, one notable being Andrew Jackson, however you feel about him. But this isn't an uncommon path of the presidency to, focus on kind of that war hawkish kind of style, which Trump's presidency has been accused of using in Iran and Syria, and even with China in regards to the trade war. But Rex Tillerson was brought in, and also former Defense Secretary Mattis. They were brought in as kind of balancing acts, and they were experts in their fields. They were brought in to do their jobs, and when they disagreed with the president, they were fired. So
yeah, you say Rex Tillerson was a person who was entirely knowledgeable about foreign policy, even though he worked at ExxonMobil. He was a CEO at ExxonMobil. Like you couldn't relate that experience to, for example, some previous people who've worked in the foreign service, people who are currently still there, and who have been tenured, and or either have been, for example, either like a deputy, a deputy Secretary of State, or, for example, been previously a Secretary of State. He didn't bring any of those people, and no, he brought.
Well, right, but even though Tillerson is a political appointee, he still had a line that couldn't be crossed. And when he made those points very clear, the president then fired him. So, ExxonMobil is a global international company. They have branches all over the world, in the Middle East, Asia, the United States, South America. So, he has a global company. He brings him in, and then he crosses the line. Trump crossed the line, he fires him, which I think it just goes back into, this whole impeachment process. Honestly, why it's been brought up by the Democrats is because Trump has even said it himself that he doesn't have a problem going in uncharted territory. He doesn't have a problem pushing the boundary. He said in an interview with George Stephanopoulos that if foreign governments offered him damaging information about his opponents in 2020, he would accept it. He honestly, and that's why many of his supporters are continue to support him and show much fervor for him, is that he's not presidential at all. He's an outsider to the presidency. He's self-proclaimed. He's not a politician. Everyone knows this. He doesn't care what people think about him. He doesn't care what he says. And that's energized his base, but it's also made the Democratic Party just terrified. And that's why they've launched this impeachment inquiry, because they honestly don't know Donald Trump's line in the sand. They don't know where he won't go. And using U.S. tax dollars to manipulate a foreign government, it's unprecedented to use U.S. foreign tax dollars to manipulate a foreign government into getting dirt on an election. As far as I know, that's unprecedented. Which a lot of Donald Trump's presidency has been unprecedented. The turnover rate has been insanely high among cabinet members, and there's only like 3 or 4 cabinet members that are still left from the original cabinet.
Yeah, and also he's never had. I'm pretty sure he never had appointed a Secretary for Defense. It's still an acting Secretary for Defense.
Well, Mattis
was
confirmed. Everybody else, you're right, has just been.
It's always been. Yeah, you had the same thing with his Director of National Intelligence. And it's always like either a constant revolving door or nobody that is there permanently who's been with him all the time. The only people that have been there with him for a prolonged period of time is Mike Pompeo, and that's it. He's changed out John Bolton, Steve Bannon. All those people have come in and come out, and like it's a revolving door. There's no stability, and the only person that is trusted is him and Rudy Giuliani.
Right. You've had Pence in there a long time. Even as you were saying, Pompeo was a replacement to Tillerson.
But the thing is, you can't say that he's going to remove Pence, because he can't really unless Pence Pence resigns.
Right. But they brought in, after Secretary Mattis resigns, they brought in Patrick Shanahan to be the acting Secretary of Defense, who was an executive at Boeing. He comes in, and within several weeks, he leaves. He served as acting Secretary of Defense from January 1st to June 23rd. The second they found out his former past, he was out, and they appointed somebody else. Even he was like, I don't know if I want to be attached to this ship if it goes down. And it just, this all just goes back to the main reason, like I was saying, why this impeachment inquiry has been launched and why it has gained traction and why the majority of Americans support the impeachment of Donald Trump, is that just, where will he go? What limit does his presidency have? Where does, the ethics overrule, a campaign promise or an objective? Because the Trump presidency has been insanely scattered. He came in saying we're going to involve fire and fury in North Korea. We were going to obliterate Kim Jong-un's regime off the map. Then 6 months later to a year later, they're best friends having the Singapore summit, the Hanoi summit, and then all is, even though North Korea has violated every agreement we've had with them since the Trump presidency, it seems to be all quiet on the Eastern Front. Okay. Then we had the Russia front, where Trump was going to be the hardest president on Russia the Russians have ever seen. And then he goes to Helsinki and says he trusts a foreign despot over his own intelligence agencies. Then we have China, where we're going to be the hardest president on China, and we cave on every major point in the trade war. So every objective that the Trump presidency has sought to accomplish has not been accomplished, at least foreign policy-wise. And now, again, another goal was trying to keep this, get dirt on a political opponent under the radar. It doesn't work because people in his own administration are like, absolutely not, that's illegal. You have career Army officers coming in, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, the Ukraine expert on the National Security Council, of course, being a part of that, saying, no, this does not stand. And then, this honestly infuriated me. But Trump has been saying, like, I'm going to be the best friend of the U.S. military. All the soldiers love me. The veterans love me, et cetera, et cetera. Well, U.S. Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testifies and says, you know what? No, I don't support this. Trump did X, Y, Z wrong. And then they go after his patriotism and accuse him of being a Ukrainian spy because he immigrated to the United States when he was 3 years old.
Yeah, no, that's insane. The thing is, like, and also, like, again, on the military, Trump's withdrawal from northern Syria, from protecting
which we covered
Kurds,
in episode 2.
Yeah, which we covered in episode 2. You should go back and listen to it again.
Shameless plug. Shameless plug.
Shameless. But the thing is, like, there were reports coming out that the soldiers that were there and who were working with the Kurds, they felt ashamed of their president and ashamed of their country.
There were videos of Kurdish citizens throwing food at the U.S. allies they were leaving. They felt abandoned, and the rest of the population agreed.
Yeah. The thing is, you also had, like, those people were like trusted the U.S. to protect them, and then, like, you had people, the U.S. soldiers who were there and who risked their lives, and they put their lives into the hands of Donald Trump. From a big picture point of view, President Trump is in charge of their lives. He can send them where he pleases, and he's commander in chief. So it's what he wants to do. That's what happens in the military, and people are ashamed of what he does, and people are scared. And it's nice how you brought up Mr. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. I want to move on to the different testimonies that have been out, and the different steps that Congress has been taking to further their impeachment inquiry. So, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman wasn't the first person to testify, and we've had Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the EU. We had Bill Taylor, who was the Ukrainian envoy, the U.S. envoy to Ukraine after Marie Yovanovitch was removed from her ambassadorship, and they've testified about how basically agreeing with the Democrats, how this was incredibly corrupt, and how Trump was trying to ruin the systems and and the way that the foreign policy is conducted in the United States. So it's quite interesting how the people who have testified have been nearly exclusively from the State Department. And you see this kind of State Department culture of constructive dissent. There's actually a yearly prize within the State Department and the foreign officers, and they give out awards every year. And one of the awards is for constructive dissent. This is something that is part of the State Department, where you can see if something is incredibly wrong, and if the people up there are doing something incredibly wrong, it is kind of your job to make sure that the US doesn't mess up royally.
Which has been, the nature of democracy is that citizens have the right to voice their opinion. And it's not, the president should surround himself with advisors that generally see the world the way he does. But when those advisors dissent, they shouldn't be fired instantly. And when those people under his administration dissent and file whistleblower reports that they did it proper, they didn't, try to hide it. They went through the proper channels. The President Trump's intelligence officers read the report saying, yes, this is credible, move it up the line, move it up the line, move it up the line. So the fact that, like you were saying, the State Department prides itself on dissenting to U.S. policy, of course, at the end of the day, they'll always follow through with it, as all officers of the U.S. the government will once they make their opinion said. If they're told otherwise, they'll follow through what they're told. But when so many people are saying, "Hey, this can't fly. This is wrong," from members of the U.S. Army or the National Security Council, who have been serving this country for decades, State Department officials, intelligence officials, Secretary of Defenses that were eventually fired, Secretaries of State that were eventually fired. Everyone has opposed, these kinds of actions, not necessarily this one in particular, but these kinds of actions that the presidency has been enacting. And when everyone is like, you cannot do this, and it's happening anyway, that just really shows that there really is no line that Trump presidency won't cross.
Yeah, I feel like it's like President Trump has no feeling of shame. There's no he doesn't feel shame, and so it's perfectly fine for him to go around just saying whatever he wants. He was saying how there was no quid pro quo, but then you had people like Gordon Sondland, Bill Taylor. Gordon Sondland eventually, after he revised his testimony a few weeks after his testimony, which again, he perjured himself, but then he corrected himself, and that's got its own legal questions. But then you have his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, come out and also say that, oh no, there was a quid pro quo. So there is kind of a massive incoherence, and he doesn't care. Like, he doesn't care about how he looks like. He just wants to portray that everyone is horrific and he's just the best of the bunch. And that's kind of his election strategy when in 2016, and I have a feeling that it's going to be quite the same in 2020 when the Democrats figure out who they want as their nominee.
On episode 2, again, shameless plug. Watch it, listen to episode 2, where we discuss everything about the Democratic primary.
But yeah, and so you have these, you have people come out. Okay, there's one more thing that I wanted to mention that you spoke about. It's how a president needs to surround himself with advisors, advisors that hold a similar point of view, but also ones that are experienced in.
Right, you can't surround yourself with yes men. That was basically my point.
Yeah, and that's what one of his previous chiefs of staff said, that you should don't get yourself a yes man. Get someone who's actually, I think it's General John Kelly, who the previous chief of staff for the president. He said that you don't get yourself a yes man. Go get yourself someone who's actually good for the job, and he got himself a yes man. Mick the Yes Man Mulvaney as his new chief of staff, and now during the summer, John Bolton left, Mattis left or got fired. Either one, it's all hazy, because he crossed so many lines that they can't stay there anymore. Like, he contradicts them in the press when they say something. He always says something different, and it's a mess. It is a massive mess. And so you see the Democrats trying to bring this out through their through the hearings, and that are actually going to be public, starting on Wednesday, the 13th of November. They're going to start with public hearings, and they're going to be inviting Kurt Volker. They're going to be having Marie Yovanovitch, the ambassador that was recalled from her post, fired. She was moved out of the way because she was apparently getting in the way. And I kind of want to go into a little bit about what do Democrats like? What are they trying to find out more? Feels like we already know everything. Like, where do you think they're going to try to find out more about?
Well, I think they're really trying to figure out if Trump has done this with Ukraine, what other countries has he reached out to? He in the Rose Garden, he asked China to investigate the Bidens. He's asked Australia, of all countries, and other countries to help William Barr, the Attorney General, with investigating U.S. intelligence agencies on leaking things. The Trump president is very paranoid. I can draw a lot of similarities to Nixon and the Watergate scandal, Nixon was an extremely paranoid guy. He had everything recorded. He fought executive privilege to the bloody end until it resulted in his loss in the Supreme Court and his eventual resignation. He's surrounded himself with a lot of shady characters. Nixon did, as President Trump has done with Paul Manafort, who has his own role in this impeachment inquiry that I won't get into. Will Barr, who worked for the first Bush, who was involved in all sorts of things. You're right. So I think the Democrats are really just trying to figure out what extent does this Trump presidency go to, because I have no idea. And honestly, I'm not even sure the president has any idea where he's going to decide to do next week. And I think the Democrats are really just trying to figure out how far has this gone, how deep has this scandal gone, who's really involved with it. Because there could be legal implications, not just for the president, but for his staff. As Nixon was never, Nixon was going to be removed from office, but Nixon himself never got in trouble as Ford pardoned him. But around 30 people went to jail due to that, including the president's top staffers and a lot of people surrounding him. Former intelligence operatives went to jail. They went the plumbers. So this just reminds me of just how deep will this really go, and that's what I think the Democrats are really trying to figure out is who did what, why, and are there others like this out there? Because the United States is the world's largest donator to foreign aid. This same strategy could easily be repeated by other countries in order to try to get information from, for example, Pete Buttigieg was deployed in Afghanistan. If we're trying to figure out what he was doing in Afghanistan, we start asking the Afghan government to find what he was doing while he was in Afghanistan. I could just see that this would go on to multiple countries, multiple different things, trying to figure out all of the dirt on Trump's political opponents, which is exactly what Nixon did when he ordered people to break into the DNC's complex at Watergate.
Yeah, no, exactly. The thing is, you talk about how far it goes, and the thing is that there's already a lot of people who are connected to the Trump presidency who've gone to jail. Again, Paul Manafort, we talked about previously. Michael Cohen's personal lawyer. You had
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein. The thing is, that is a questionable connection to Donald Trump. It's an alleged connection to Donald Trump. But there have been a lot of, even during the Mueller report, he handed out indictments left and right. There have been, I think it was around somewhere between 10 and 20 indictments that were given out during the Mueller report, during the creation of the Mueller report, for different violations, and that's all around Trump. And he has surrounded him with people that are shady and sketchy, and so it's how deep it goes. It's like, what's the next step? Because thing is that, okay, let's say the Democrats get through impeachment and then they get him removed from office. Well, what's for them? That's like a end goal, because then he can't get reelected, and it'll be a much easier fight if it's, for example, Pence. And that, Pence could be involved as well. We don't know yet, because it's kind of like the beginning. And I feel like also the Democrats are trying to publicize it more and use it as part of their campaign. This is their start to the 2020 presidential campaign. Of how, so now the Congress is going to start doing open testimony, open to the public, and this can be seen by everyone on TV. Just turn on C-SPAN, and you can just you can watch as much as you like of it being laid out by people who are trusted, who've worked in many different governments, who've worked for the government for 30, 40, 50 years, they just come and lay out all the information about Trump's wrongdoings and of Trump's poor behavior. And I feel like that's where they're starting off at, and it would be interesting to hear what they're going to have to say, what they have to say, and the way that they're going to be able to question people. And this is kind of what was important in the on the 31st of October, when the Democrats were able to vote through a bill basically ratifying the impeachment inquiry. They didn't have to, but they set out the rules for the inquiry. They've set out rules of how people are going to be questioned, and how, like, for example, the chairman and the ranking member, the chairman being Democratic and ranking member being Republican, are able to question the witness for 45 minutes straight, and their staff lawyers are able to question for 45 minutes straight. And so it's kind of them opening it up and being fair about this impeachment inquiry. They could just have an impeachment inquiry entirely democratically based, because it's part of the Congress and they have a majority in Congress and they can vote on anything through. They could probably vote on impeachment tomorrow and vote on impeachment today and have it pass through Congress and send it to the Senate. But they're working through it methodically, and they're trying to get through this, get as much information, you could say they're getting as much dirt as they can on President Trump through this impeachment inquiry. But thing is that there have been a lot of wrongdoings. And thing is, one of the things that also that was mentioned in the whistleblower report was how the phone call was moved to a highly secretive server used for top secret information, or highly sensitive information, top secret information, on like a code word level classification. And that's one of the top levels of secrecy. That's where, like, the biggest secrets in U.S. government are held. It's like if the aliens are real, that's where they're going to be held. And they treat phone calls with people like Erdogan, phone calls with people like Putin, phone calls with Zelensky. They put into that server because they don't want people to know about it, because there's something wrong with it. Because the thing is that you had during President Obama's reign, what would happen is he would have a call, and then that transcript would be either read out verbatim in a press briefing straight afterwards, or it would be in some way published, because it's a freedom of information sort of thing, where unless there's something top secret that they would redact, and even that. Like, you had the intelligence members of the intelligence community come out and say that we don't trust President Trump with some of the high-level secretive information, that he could have compromised some of the people that were working for the CIA as part of the mission to bring down ISIS. And apparently it was alleged that during his talk with President Putin that he might have jeopardized one of their missions. So it's been a mess. It has been a massive mess, and so they're trying to figure out how bad it got, and how much they'll have to fix if they get into the presidency in 2020.
Right. Speaking of 2020, and what you were talking about earlier about the Democrats trying to use this for the 2020 election, could backfire for them in the 2020 election. It's very likely that the House has already impeached the president. The inquiry has started to impeach the president, and it is more likely than not that the House will officially impeach him in the coming months. It is highly unlikely that the Senate will remove him from office, just because the Republicans have locked control of the Senate. When and I'm going to go with if, and most likely when, this impeachment fails and the Trump is still president after he's been impeached, that will definitely energize his base, and will, everything he says is going to be, treated like truth, because he's already spoken of the witch hunt with the Mueller report. He called it a witch hunt ever since the elections, ever since he was elected, and Mueller couldn't come out and definitively say if he was guilty of foreign interference or not. Okay, so and the people in his supporters' minds, he was clear. When this impeachment inquiry goes through, and if the Senate shoots it down, in his supporters' minds, he's free and clear, and that's going to energize more people in more states to throw their support behind him, because in reality, there's no Democratic candidate that can defeat him right now. I don't think there is. The Democratic Party's too fractured. They just haven't decided. which right, but as we know, the popular election means nothing. It's the electoral vote that counts. And Hillary Clinton was projected to win the 2016 election by a significant margin, but on election day, that's not what happened. So with the economy being the way it is, I don't see Trump being defeated as of right now, unless the Democrats can, form together. So if this impeachment inquiry does not succeed, Trump remains in office until 2020. He's going to just energize his base, and people are going to be supporting him. They're saying, look, the Democrats, the nasty Democrats, have tried twice to defeat me. They've tried with this money wasting, BS Mueller report that couldn't prove me guilty, and they've tried with this expensive, long lasting, with my trying to turn my own government officials against me, impeachment inquiry that I've had to oust half my staff because they've gone against me. It's just gonna, again, he, according to his supporters, no matter what they do, he cannot be defeated, and it'll just energize him in 2020. And that just, I can honestly see this impeachment inquiry. That's why Nancy Pelosi was so hesitant to enact this, because some Democrats have been, they voted for impeachment on within the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. They voted to impeach him, and obviously it didn't pass because it was a few fringe Democrats. But this has been in the back of Democrats' minds from the beginning. It's been in the back of anti-Trump voters from the beginning. They need to remove him from office. They need to remove him because something nefarious is going on. Now the Speaker of the House of Representatives has thrown her support behind this impeachment inquiry. The Minority Leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, has thrown his support behind this impeachment inquiry. But now the mainstream Democratic Party is pro-impeachment. Now it truly has become a partisan issue, as with the vote on the inquiry was 232 to 119. 2 Democrats were against the inquiry, and one Republican was for it. That's party lines. The majority, that's just is what it is. So if this impeachment issue it hasn't become U.S. v. Trump. It has not. Did the U.S. president betray the American people by exerting foreign influence? It has become Republicans versus Democrats, with the United States caught in between, and that to me is just a recipe for disaster. Because honestly, this is actually acceptable. If Trump is impeached, he technically could run for office again. The Senate would probably forbade it, because that's what they would do, because if someone's removed from office, they shouldn't be allowed to run back for it. But technically he could. There's no precedent for this because no U.S. president's been removed from office. And I don't think that Trump will be the first, unless there's, some more evidence that comes out. Like with what we have right now, he won't be impeached just because of the way the Senate's leaning. With Mitch McConnell, before he even saw any evidence, says, we're not going to impeach him. He's going to stay president of the United States. Which is another matter in itself, which is also highly concerning. But, I digress. I don't have 6 hours to go into all this. But this just mess of impeachment and, shady dealings with Ukraine and Russia and China and Saudi Arabia has all just culminated in this, end-all be-all between Republicans and Democrats, with the country of the United States caught in between. Because, George Washington warned us about this in his farewell address, that parties would destroy the United States. And now I'm not going to go on that far as saying that they, the United States will not be ending anytime soon. We're not going to have civil war. That's outrageous. But this factionism, this partisanism is just ripping us apart at the core. Because this process should be used, although it hasn't been. It's been used on a party basis every time. With President Johnson, it was used on a party basis. With Clinton, it was on a party basis. Nixon wasn't. Nixon was truly guilty, and Nixon was going down. And the Republicans in the Senate agree with that. But the other 3 times, including this time with Trump, it's been on a party basis. And now, while I do think there is wrongdoing that has happened here, along with the Clinton impeachment, I think there was something wrong there too. I don't think it's going to pass. And I think that Trump will remain president, and it's just going to energize the base and further just divide the country.
Yeah, and the thing is, I feel like we've talked about this previously, but it's like a 2-party system that is it's not right. It doesn't represent everyone because there isn't. Everyone has their own views, and some people believe for more left-leaning, liberal, socialist views, and then you've got people who are much more conservative, and then there's some people in the middle. Some people who believe in some liberal views, but also believe in some conservative views. It's a spectrum. It's not a divide, and that's why you have this kind of like a split, and you've got the two vocal sides, and you have to pick between the vocal sides because, let's be honest, third-party candidate's not going to win, just because of the way that the strength of the two parties. You're never going to have what you're not going to have in the next few years. You're not going to have a third-party candidate who's going to win or who's going to win an election unless something extraordinary happens. So it's very, like, for me it's a bit disconcerting how, like, you have it has become so partisan. You have just two sides going at each other, and you see that in the polling. You have somewhere around 85% of people, 85% of Democrats support impeachment, and then 85% of Republicans are against impeachment. It's just entirely split between the two, and it's a choice, and that choice isn't representative, and it's kind of what George Washington was talking about. It's like how if you have parties, they're going to grow, and then there's going to be a two-party system like there is in the United States. But we see more and more, and we also see this in Europe now, how there is no longer just two parties or just two main parties. We see, for example, I'm going to bring the example of the UK. You see so many different parties. You have the Brexit Party, you have the Liberal Democrats, you have the Labour Party, and you have the Conservatives, the Tory Conservatives, and it's projected that there's going to be a lot more votes shared between the candidates in the upcoming elections, and you see that the spectrumization and the people trying to figure out who they're with, and not voting specifically on specific issues, but they're trying to find the perfect fit of a party that supports everything I support, stands for everything I want, and do it in the way that I want to. And that's kind of an issue, because you can't have a majority vote democracy where you have more than 50% of people agree on exactly everything in the every single bit in the policy, and the way that it's implemented. That just isn't the case, and it's very difficult to get that. And basically, you would have to change the system entirely and think of a brand new system if you want to implement that. And it is so. The thing is, like, with the impeachment inquiry, it is very partisan, and unless they find literally a video. The thing is, even like as Donald Trump said, he could kill somebody shoot somebody in the middle of the street in New York, and his base wouldn't blink an eye. Like, it's true. It's sad, but it's true. Like, if
the base is they're blind, honestly, and I don't know of other candidates like this. I don't believe President Obama's base was blind, or Bush's or Clinton's. I don't believe they were just blind to a president's actions and always chose to support him. The main thing here, I think, for most people is this asking a foreign government for election interference impeachment worthy, because it's uncharted waters. It's never happened that we know of. The Constitution is very vague on what counts as impeachable. We've had incidents of a violation of a partisan, cabinet law under Johnson that was just honestly garbage. You had Nixon, who was clearly guilty of a cover-up. And then you had, Clinton, who perjured himself. We've had a wide range of charges. One was very, very bad with Nixon, and the other two, weren't as bad. This is just kind of honestly worse, depending on your views. I think it's worse than Nixon's charge, that inviting foreign aid into an election, because the United States has called out other people in the past for doing just that. We called out Russia in 2016 for trying to influence our election. People were.
Well, the thing is, we didn't call out Russia. And that's the issue, that Obama didn't call out Russia because it would have been partisan. And that's kind of the issue. That's kind of what happened was you had Obama and his intelligence was telling him that Russia was interfering in the elections. But it was so close to the elections that if President Obama came out and said that Russia's interfering in the elections, trying to elect Trump, it's an easy spin to say that they're just doing this partisan. It's a partisan thing. They're trying to get Hillary Clinton to win, and I'm not going to stand for this. And we need Donald Trump because he's not going to be like this, and he's not going to try to corrupt the system of power to get himself and get his party reelected. You kind of see that. But the thing is, I also wanted to talk about was in the way that things that Donald Trump has done. You could see that it's all three impeachments that we've had in the past, or the impeachment inquiries that we've had in the past, put together. We had an egregious act by the president in asking for foreign aid, like you see in Johnson. Then you see a cover-up that you see the attempt to cover up and keep covering up the things that he has done and the things that he's done. That's what we saw in Nixon. But then you also have in Clinton. Trump is a compulsive liar. He's lied on many different things. I'm not gonna bring up everything, but I'm just gonna say the Sharpie on the map of the hurricane that draws it onto Alabama where it didn't even hit. So like things like that. It's compulsive, it's constant, and he is always right. He can never be wrong. Whatever he says, he could perjure himself if for example the court rules that you have to comply with the subpoenas issued by Congress, and if they subpoena President Trump, if he doesn't show up, they hold him in contempt of court. That would be very contempt of Congress. That'd be very interesting how to see the president being brought into Congress with handcuffs. But if they subpoena him and he is forced to come and testify, if he perjures himself, then they're just going to do Clinton on him. So it's all three together, and this is what I agree with some Democrats about, that this again, and with you, like, it's unprecedented and it's worse than it's ever been. Like you haven't seen this thing. You haven't seen like this kind of egregiousness in a president for ever. Like it's kind of it's a bit insane that we live in these times.
Yeah, I agree. The scandals that I remember rocked President Obama's presidency was, just from the beginning, it was even a U.S. citizen, which is a complete conspiracy theory that was completely disproved. That was garbage. He's from the U.S. state Hawaii. And then he wore a tan suit in a press conference. That rocked his presidency to the core, where he was considered unpresidential and all this other stuff. And now, since day one, President Trump has been just embassador in scandal, whether it be this Ukraine thing, whether it be issues with Russia, whether it be issues with his campaign staff and all of his staffers being accused and found guilty of everything under the sun, from campaign finance violations, where they, even Trump's own foundation has been found guilty of embezzling money and using it for campaign funds. That just recently came out. We're trying to pay $2 million to his own fund. His tax returns have been in the court system all the way through. His immigration system's been in the court all the way through. He hasn't had, really, in my opinion, a major win, besides maybe killing the leader of ISIS, or perhaps some tax reform, if you believe that sort of tax reform is good for the country. But his major campaign promises have just been not achieved. The wall has not been built yet. The war in Syria still continues, even though we withdrew our troops but then we had to deploy them again to protect oil fields that were somehow deemed strategically important. China's trade war still goes on. Russia still owns Crimea. So he's been failing, in my opinion, in a lot of different aspects. And this is just another example of his back being pressed against the wall, and another failure of trying to use dirt on a political opponent from a foreign country because that political opponent's son happened to work there for 5 years.
Yeah, and also, like, Biden's most likely not going to become the nominee.
Yeah, he has a tough race against Warren and Buttigieg and Harris and Sanders. It's not a clear. He was the front runner. But it's not clear.
Nobody knows. Yeah,
and now
he was. Yeah, what was is the important word in that sentence. He was the front runner, and now it's Warren. But it's very, very early in the race. We don't know who it's going to be, and so yeah. The thing is, it's like that's kind of what Trump's forte is keeping away from his failure in his policies and just talking about those scandals. Scandals about everything that's been going on around his policies, not actually his policies, is what's been helping him to get through this. Is that it's just that he's been constantly making scandal after scandal after scandal the main part of the story and not about the policies. We saw this in 2016 where there was overall in total over the major networks put together over the 2016 election between Clinton and Trump, there was 33 total air minutes of people talking about policy between Hillary Clinton and Trump. 33 minutes of airtime compared to hundreds of hours on emails, on the wall. The wall is part of it, but it's
right. His being accused with women
scandals of like
and
the Hollywood
things
access
of being
bus.
racist, and then it's
I
American
that.
politics
Yes.
honestly become a theatrical production more than it is about actual policy, and that just again contributes to this impeachment inquiry. It's become a partisan issue. It's not being done for the good of the country. I think it is being good for the good of the country, but that's not how it's been framed. It's been framed as a partisan issue instead of, has the U.S. president really violated his oath of office? That's not what it's become. It's become the Democrats are evil witch hunters, or Trump has something to hide and he's a stain on the office of the president. There's no hey, let's try to figure out if he actually did something. It's just witch hunt or remove the scourge. That's pretty much how it's been. And I don't think that's a recipe for success, and it's not. And it's we've drawn comparisons to the Clinton impeachment. It's the same thing. Clinton also was guilty, but he was acquitted by the Senate. It's the same thing happening again, and that's why I think we're just gonna have to wait and see and just look for the smoking gun, for lack of better terms, to find the bombshell evidence that will convince the Senate, or we watch this impeachment inquiry go down in flames and watch the 2020 election and see what happens. Because right now, Biden's chances have been hurt at a re-election. I think Trump's have honestly been enhanced because his base has been energized. But honestly, this might have been brilliant campaign strategy from the Trump administration to get Biden out of the race. I don't know, because it's kind of working. It's probably an unintentional consequence, but it might have worked. So right now, we just have to sit back and see what is really going to happen, because right now it's honestly anyone's game. It really just is going to what will convince the Senate that he is guilty of wrongdoing. And honestly, I don't know, because it's going to take a lot.
Yeah, because the thing is, there has to be one of two things. There has to be either actual legitimate, not saying that evidence that we have now is illegitimate, but incredibly credible evidence. Basically, a video of him doing massive crime or doing something incredibly wrong for the Senate. But the second thing is a change of public opinion. If the Democrats are able to convince the people of America that Trump has done a lot of things wrong and he is a bad president and he has been doing bad things throughout his presidency, or even these few different things that he's been doing for either to enrich himself or that break laws or that are just incredibly unethical, that he should be impeached over, then the senators would be pushed to remove him from office, and it would be one of two things. For example, in the Republican Party, like a massive cleanse, trying to remove Trumpist policies, and trying to move away from that, or they're going to continue with that, and just not remove him from office because, well, they've got a 40% base, but if the 40% base is removed or decreased to, let's say, 30%, then they're not going to win an election. 30% doesn't win you an election, even through electoral votes. You need more than that. So it's going to be very interesting to watch the going-ons, and starting on Wednesday, the everything that's going to be happening in the open testimonies, the public testimonies that are going to be happening, and to see what Trump has been doing.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting next couple of months. We'll see what happens for the recess in December of Congress, to see if they decide to pull a full impeachment vote to the floor. We'll see what happens with the Democratic nomination, because I think that'll definitely change the direction of this impeachment inquiry, whether they really do go after Biden or not. So we'll have to just wait and see, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have another episode on this as more evidence comes out, because, I mean, every day there's just something else coming out. And we'll have to wait and see. So with that, we'd like to thank you all for listening to episode 4 of Politics. Thank you for listening, and see you soon.